Hi, and welcome to the Selected Tech podcast, brought to you by a group of 4 MVPs doing webinars, sessions, and interviews on all things SharePoint, Office 365, and the Microsoft AI ecosystem. Their motto is learn, share, reuse. And here they are, Albert Jan, Rick, Stefan, and Tommy.
Hi everyone, welcome to another Selected Tech episode. Today Appie is going to talk to us about recognizing team members with the CLI from Microsoft 365 or the M365 CLI. It's easier to say, of course. So I think Appie is ready for it. Appie, are you ready for it? I think so.
I'm definitely ready for it. There we go.
Very curious for this session, so let's get started.
Well, let's see if we can do some demos. So, starting with a little bit of background. Imagine that you're working on your environment and you're doing your stuff. You're collaborating in Teams or SharePoint or whatever you're trying to achieve. And at some point, you decide that you want to recognize what everyone is doing. And there are samples out there explaining how you can do that. There are a lot of blog posts out there explaining that recognizing contributions is a great way to boost morale. That's really important to showcase work that people are doing or highlight community contributions that you do within your environment. So we were discussing this at one of our webinars or one of our not officially recorded, and we were discussing, okay, what could we do with the type of data? And actually, a lot of the data is already available in your environment. We already know what users are doing, and we both get anonymized data as well as real active data that people can use within an environment. So we start discussing, okay, what could you do with it, and how complex would it be to walk through different scenarios? And basically we ended up saying, hey, the CLI for M365 would actually help us achieve that. So let's start playing around with that. And we have 2 samples on how you can recognize what people are doing and score points. So maybe highlighting people who are doing really well, or you could use that same data to recognize or figure out who's not doing that well in your environment and maybe help them out with additional guidance or help them out with additional training to make sure that they're making the most of the different services that you have in your environment. Now, with the CLI for Microsoft 365, you can actually work with a bunch of data that's already present. So if I would pick my browser, and if I would let's open that one. And if I would go to the CLI 5, I will get some documentation. And if you go to the different commands that are out there, there are actually quite a few commands that already provide you with reporting data, with background information. So if you go to your tenant environment, or if you go to a specific service, you can actually see that there is report information available. So if you go to OneDrive, you do have report activity file counts, report activity user detail. So there are a bunch of reports available for OneDrive. Those reports are also available for Teams, for SharePoint. Those are available for tenant level wide settings. So there are quite a lot of different reports that you can use. Now, if you're working with those reports, the output is pretty straightforward. So you do M365. Let's see if I'm logged in. Yeah, I'm logged in. I should also update, but I'm not going to do that. Not before a demo. But I could do like M365 Teams report. And if I would go back to the documentation, what you will see is if I go to Teams, if I go to my reports, there are actually a few reports available. And if I pick one of those reports, I could say, okay, let me get the user activity user detail, which is the most detailed report that is available. And if I run that, then you will actually get an error saying, oh, you need to specify a period or date. We need to get at least one of those parameters returned. So if I do that, what I can do is I can specify period, and I can say, okay, I want to get the last 7 days. And if I run that against my tenant, okay, apparently I have to sign in again. That's interesting. M365 log out, log in.
Yeah, but your administrator changed something.
Yeah, but I'm pretty sure that I'm the administrator here. So
You're the admin. You're the admin.
I can't recall that I changed anything.
I know that guy. Oh, he's terrible.
Alice, that was the morning Appie. It was the morning Appie.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. So let me quickly sign in. Okay, now I actually have to sign in again. I should have single sign-on available on this device.
Maybe you're flagged as a risky user or something for
By the administrator.
Oh, now I get an MFA challenge. That's interesting.
MFA challenge, another email. Yeah, something happened to your user. You did something wrong.
Yeah, I'm still. Yeah, we can still use the PnP management shell. Nothing there. Okay, I can close this window. M365 status. Yeah, I'm still signed in. Oh, there we go. So as soon as I've run this report, I actually get a report. It doesn't read that easy, but what you see in this report is you see a bunch of information. There are a bunch of columns: refresh date, user principal name, last activity date is deleted. So this is all the metrics that you get in a report. And if you get a OneDrive reporting, you probably get pretty much the same result. It's slightly different depending on the service that you're using, but you always get things like the report, refresh date, the user principal name, last activity date, and then depending on the service that you're working with, you get things like Teams chat messages sent or count or received, or if you're using Exchange, you get email sent and email read, stuff like that. So you get some details in this information. Now, the downside of this is that this might not be that representative of what you're actually using. But you could use something like this to say, okay, I want to get all the active Teams users and I want to see who's active the most. So what I can do is I can actually apply complex queries to this data set. And if you're working with complex queries, you can actually sort this set of data, or you can filter this set of data. And if you look at what you see here, you have things like Teams chat message count, private chat message count, call count, and meeting count. So there is a lot of information that you could use. And you could say for the Teams environment, maybe you want to use the amount of chat messages that you've sent, or maybe the actual chat messages that you've received, and work with that. Or if you're using SharePoint, you can do things like viewed files or edited files, stuff like that, and use that data to work with. Now, to work with this set of data is becomes slightly complex pretty quick, or at least that was my experience, because I was like, okay, I've got this data, I can put it in a PowerShell variable and work with it. And then all of a sudden I was like, okay, I want to sort it and I want to filter it, but I don't really want to sort it using PowerShell itself. I really want to use it within the CLI, because if I'm using it with the CLI, I can use other cross-platform experience as well. So instead of using just the PowerShell parameters or the PowerShell options that I have, what I wanted to do is I wanted to use JamesPad. JamesPad is something that you have in the CLI, and with JamesPad you can write some more complex queries and actually work with that. So I did prep the sample because that makes life a little bit easier. Let me get the CLI champions. So here you go. What I do is okay, I'm getting SharePoint reporting or Teams reporting or Yammer reporting, whatever I want to report on. Then I'm going to say, okay, for SharePoint, I'm using the SPO report activity user details. And then I'm going to say, I want to get it from the last 7 days. I'm going to output JSON. And what you then can do, if you have JSON, you can actually use JamesPad to filter down that data set. And what we're going to do is we're going to sort this data set by the amount of viewed or edited files. And we're going to use a reverse sort, making sure that the guy or girl who had the most viewed or edited files actually shows up on top. And then what we're going to do is we're going to get the top 3 results. And from those top 3 results, we actually get the user display name. So if I would execute this, what I would get returned is a PowerShell parameter with at least 1, 2, or 3 results, depending on how many active users. So what I'm going to do, activity users, and you see in my demo tenant, I only have 2 users because I only work with 2 users. But you can imagine if you have like 10,000 users, this report would now only return me the top 3 users who had the most, the highest number of viewed or edited files. And if you have the data, what you can then do is you can then actually report on the data. And you can do things like adaptive cards, or you can put it in a database, or you can work with it in some other format. For demo purposes, what I did is I created a adaptive card, and I posted that adaptive card to my teams. In order to do that, what you need is you'll need to have your webhook URL. And if you have a webhook URL, what you can then do is you can construct an adaptive card. That adaptive card can look really complex, can look really, really, really fancy. You can do whatever you like with it. But the only thing you'll need to do is you'll need to do the M365 adaptive card send, specify the webhook URL, and specify the actual card. So if I would execute this script, let me get those. Show you that there's no smoke and mirrors. I can just paste that webhook URL. Now I have to change it because it's in the recording, but I will do that. And if I would do this, what actually happens is it gets those users again, it constructs that card, and then it sends an adaptive card. And if I go to my Teams environment, what I will now see is it should show up any minute now. General, go back here. There we go. I expected it at some point. There are no errors.
It sounds cool.
It sends successfully. It's not showing up yet. Now there could be, when you're working with adaptive cards, there could be a delay of a few seconds, but I'm slightly confused as to why it's not showing up.
Still connected, or maybe this recording is taking up all your bandwidth. I've seen that also.
Yeah, I'm hoping it's not. But let me do for both to see what actually is happening. It says done. Should be done. Yeah.
Take out your phone. Maybe you have like 20 cards already. And
yeah, I'm gonna check with my phone. That's actually interesting. Let me do Teams.
Phone is usually I find it faster with Teams.
Yeah, the phone experience. Okay, yeah, this is really interesting because on my phone, the cards are there.
Okay, yeah.
Then try connecting the web. Yeah.
Let me try to do the.
There's a client. Yeah.
Different thingy. Don't want to do this. There we go. Still not there.
Kill the client and then open it up again.
Yeah, I'm not. 2. Oh, I think we've got problems with Teams because in my browser it's not loading either.
Okay.
But it's on the smartphone. It's already there.
On the smartphone, it's there, but if I go to my browser,
then it's in Teams.
I get stuck in an infinite sign-in loop. Let me.
Oh, that sounds nothing like Active Directory.
You really messed up this morning.
This is coming from my cache. Now, yeah. So here it is. Interesting.
Okay.
839, 838. Really weird, really weird. So as you can see, the adaptive card has been sent. You can do things with emojis. You can do, make it look fancy, make it look pretty. And if you want to do anything with adaptive cards, I can really recommend the Adaptive Card Designer. And that's this one. There you got a bunch of samples that you can either use or you can play around with. And basically what I did is I just picked one of those samples and fiddled a bit with it before working with it. I didn't spend too much time on how it should look, but in general, just putting some data in there, you'll need a data set, and you can just write out that output. Now, as you can see, I had samples for Teams. I have SharePoint or a sample for SharePoint, Teams, and Yammer. This is just where you get data from and that you can actually work with. Now, this is on a tenant level, so general level. And the next thing is where it gets a bit interesting, or I would say a bit more interesting, is after I release this.
Can we do questions before?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
I have two questions. First question, you said that you provide a filter for the data, but technically you're pulling down everything and sort it on the client, right?
Yeah, so what JamesPad actually does is it pulls in all your data as JSON and then filters or sorts in memory on your client. So it's
So if you have 7,000 users in your report, that will be 7,000 items down through the wire and filtered on the client side. Have you any idea how long the report takes for a tenant with a couple of thousand seats?
We have a big tenant.
So basically the reporting is pre-populated. So
okay,
if
that's just retrieving data basically that already exists.
Yeah.
Okay.
So if I do this, there we go. If I do this, what you actually see is that there is a flag called report refresh date. And for any line in the result, there is that report refresh date. And what you will see is that in a tenant with like 10 or 100 users, the report refresh date will always be the same. If you're running a tenant with 60,000 people, you will see that the report date might be 1, 2, or 3 days old, depending on the batch where a user was being processed.
Okay.
So it's not real-time data. It's going to be processed, I think, once a day if your tenant is small enough. If it's larger, it becomes a little bit less accurate.
Yeah, if it's larger, you probably would go, what's it called? The Graph Data Connect. Is that the product, the service where you can basically pull out all those reporting data via graph through your own Azure database and then do processing there? If you really want like thousands of data points, I guess.
Yeah. So the default that you can get a report aggregation over, so I'm specifying the last 7 days here. You can either specify the last 7 days, the last 30, 90, and 180 days, and that's it. So you cannot get other reporting. This is what Microsoft provides you with predefined.
So everything in terms of time span, Microsoft is based the experience on the recycle bin from SharePoint. 30 days, 60 days, 90 days, 180 days. Okay, gotcha. And the second question, when you once again go to the adaptive card designer, because I was always too stupid to do that, there is then a sample data and payload, and the notion for PowerShell is different. You can't just copy and paste that, or?
Okay, good point. There are 2 things that I cheated on a little bit. I didn't want to use I didn't want to use the sample. I didn't want to use the payload because I got a bunch of errors using the payload and it was really complex. So I was like, oh, I can cheat my way around that. So what I'm doing is I'm just specifying the cards, and the card contains everything, including the data that I want to present. So I'm not using the payload. Officially, you should use the card and the payload. It should work.
So it's not template and data, and then together the card. It's card is just everything.
I merged the card and the data directly together. It's cheating a bit. One thing that you should be aware of is that if you're using this in PowerShell core and you are thus working with PowerShell, the notion is slightly different. So as you can see, it uses the you have to escape everything. So basically what I did is I grabbed this one and I opened Notepad, and
then
basically you need to do 2 things. So let me so there we go. I can paste that. Then you have to do there is a shortcut, Control J. Then you get everything on a single line because everything has to be on a single line. Otherwise, it's not working. And you'll need to do the find and replace. So basically, all you need to do is find and replace anything and escape it. And then you're good as long as it's on one line.
Yeah, I thought so because
do that as well.
Yeah, you just can't copy that down there and put it in PowerShell because I tried that and I failed miserable.
Yeah. The first time I was like, oh, I can do copy card payload. There we go. And I was like, this is not working. Really weird error I get. And then you get things like if you are using emojis in PowerShell core preview, I think like PowerShell Core 6 Preview 3 or something like that, then the emojis are not working. And then in PowerShell Core 7, they're working again. That probably has to do with encoding. And I was like, oh, this is like weird because it wasn't working and now it is working. And it gets confusing pretty quick.
So just imagine there must be a guy or a girl out there that got the backlog item of updating PowerShell to be able to create emojis.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure that the backlog item wasn't to ensure emojis, but something like fancy Chinese characters that are not in the default character set. And as soon as they fixed that, then emojis started working as well.
Okay.
I hope.
Maybe it was my surname with the Ö.
Yeah.
That is maybe also fixed now. We should try that.
yeah, we can try that. Yeah. So this is an interesting approach, and I was really happy with playing around with it and fiddling around with it. And I did a blog post about it. And then Tommy came around and was like, yeah, this solution sucks. Really fancy that you can get that data, but it's not relevant. I want to get more insights into what's happening in a specific team, and I want to actually see what people are doing rather than just saying, oh, you sent the most chat messages or you sent the most Yammer messages. And actually that comment made sense. So I like being challenged. So we started discussing another way forward because a lot of the data is actually already present in the Microsoft Graph. So it's not just this report data that you can use. You can actually get all the data yourself. And it's a slightly different approach because if you want to do that, then depending on the scenario, let's say you want to get all activity within a specific team and you want to score those activities at using some sort of scoring method. It can be arbitrary, doesn't really matter what you're using. But going from that scenario, what you actually need to do is you'll need to retrieve a team. Then you'll need to retrieve everything in the team. So you'll need to retrieve channels. You need to retrieve all messages in all channels. You need to retrieve likes, replies, files from SharePoint if you want to use them, calendar meetings in Exchange. So if you start doing that, then you actually have to think about, okay, what I'm going to use and what are scoring options that I have. So I did another sample. It looks a little bit like this. So I'm still using the adaptive card. It looks different, but I still use the adaptive card to actually present the information. But working with the data is slightly different. So what you need to do is you'll need to actually come up with a few different steps. So the first thing you'll need to do is you'll need to specify the team that you want to work with. And that can be a team name or a team ID. I chose the team ID because that's a little bit quicker, a little less code. And then the next thing that you'll need to do is you need to specify how long are you going to or how much data are you going to retrieve. So I'm going to do the last 7 days. That's why I'm doing add days -7. And that's what I'm going to use to query any changes for in Microsoft Teams. You can do other dates as well. You can actually retrieve everything if you want to. But you can imagine if you're retrieving all messages from all channels in a team, it can grow quite big. So that might not actually be something that you want to do. And then the first thing that you'll need to do is you'll need to retrieve all channels because a team has channels, period. There's always going to be at least one channel and you'll need to process those channels. Then you'll get a result array that contains some results. You get a score results array. You could do that in a single array or a multi-dimensional array, but for demo purposes, it made a little bit more sense to keep them separated for readability. Then I'm doing a counter to show you actually how far ahead we were processing that team. You could skip that as well if you want to, but for demo purposes, so things actually make sense. Then what you're going to do is you walk through each channel. And for each channel, what you need to do is you'll need to retrieve all messages for that channel. And if you do that, what you actually can do is you can say, okay, I want to specify the since, and then you can say, okay, I want to get all the messages that are either edited, created, or modified since a specific date. So doing this will make sure that I get the last 7 days of messages. Then I'm doing a message counter, and then for each message, I'm gonna walk through that data. I'm gonna process that information. Now, that's where it gets a bit confusing because if I'm working with a message, then the next thing that I can do is I can get data from a specific message, or I can additional data for that message itself. Now, the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to skip any messages that are created with an application. So anything that does not have a user ID is either created by a chatbot or is created by a different process. So we're going to skip it. And we're only going to use the messages created by a user. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to add it to my result array, and I'm going to say, okay, this is the type. I created a post, and these are the details. This is the user that created that message. This is the subject for that specific this specific message. Or in this case, I'm not going to say what the subject is. I'm only going to specify whether it has a subject or not. That could potentially be something that I want to score on, because messages with a subject are better to read, or are I think should score more points. Then for any message that you have, you can potentially have reactions. So a message would have a reaction. It's a like or a social thingy. So if you get a thumbs up or an angry smile, that's a reaction. And then I'm going to say, okay, I get a reaction. This is the reaction type, and this is the user ID that gave the reaction. Because maybe if I like something, I want to score that as well. Then the next thing is I need to get all the replies for that specific message. That's not something that you get returned by default. So you need to say, okay, give me all the replies for this specific message. And then for each reply, I'll need to do the same thing again. So I want to skip out any replies that are created by a chatbot. Then if there is a reply, I want to tag it as a reply, saying, okay, this is the user that did the reply. And if there's any reaction on any reply, I'm going to log all those reactions. Now, then you have all your results, and then you can say, okay, I'm going to do results or results grouped, and I'm going to group all those results by user ID, because I want to make sure that those users are actually getting points for what they're doing. And if I group by user ID, then what you can actually do is you can score those points based on the reaction that they have, or whether they did a post or a reply. And that is where the next thing is coming in. So for each user in my results, what I'm going to do is first, I'm going to retrieve some additional info, because if I'm working with a user, what I get returned is only the user principal name, and I want to get the display name. So I'm getting a user object, and then I'm going to count points. And this isn't really fancy looking. You can make this look way better, but this is again for readability. So I'm saying, okay, you get 1 point you get 2 points for any new message, any new post on Teams that you created. You can get an additional point for any post where you used a subject. Then you get a point for any reply that you gave to a message. And then finally, you can get a half point for any like that you gave either on a reply or on a message itself. And then if you do that, then you get the score results. And in the score results, we're going to score the display name, the user principal name, and we're going to do the actual score. And then you can do something like we did before with an adaptive card. And we're going to say, okay, this is the most active team members. I'm going to render the adaptive card. And if I would post this, or if I would run this, what I actually get is I get some code running. Let me do Control C. Let me go to this one. Let me run paste. This is going to run, and it probably won't show up in my Teams client again, but you can see, okay, processing channel, processing message 1 of 2, and I get a bunch of errors. Not quite sure why.
Because you want to have 1, 2, 3, and you only have 1, 2.
Yeah, but it should not work. It should work with a nullable array. Let me go to the browser. So, okay, there is a minor issue in this last version of the script. It's not showing anyone who's active. Might be that I haven't done anything last week. That actually makes sense. But if all would be well, you get the most active team members for last week, and you get my name, someone else's names, silver medal, gold medal, amount of points that we scored. And you can imagine that you could run this rather than running it as a PowerShell script on my machine, using the Logic app, using a Docker container, and run it on a weekly modus, and post every Friday afternoon the most active member of your team, or the top 3. And like I said, it's now using your activity on Teams itself. So I'm using messages, replies, and likes, but you can also retrieve that same data. How many files have you viewed? Or how many files have you edited in SharePoint? how many, I don't know, things on Yammer were marked as answered. So all the data is already there. The only thing is that you need to retrieve it and score it into your test.
But you're counting users' activities. What I mean is, if I am in the team, you're counting the likes I give out, the reactions I give out, not the ones that I receive.
Oh, you can do that as well.
Yeah,
you
but that's a different.
So now,
okay,
now it's counting.
Counting what I'm clicking on, or it's my reactions. Yeah,
about your activities.
So a message has a reaction, and for each reaction, it shows who was it and what was the type. So in this case, if I get I can do results. I can show you. Yes, results. Results. Group. Still quite empty. I think that's the issue. But what you could do is, instead of saying, okay, I'm going to do type is reaction and Appie gave the reaction, I'm going to also count the reaction and award it to the one who created the message, because the guy who created the message should get points for getting a like as well. You could do that as well.
And then you can also create something like you can, or just thinking out loud, I count every like you gave out, and I also can count every negative reaction. And then I can
so you get the angry smiley, where when you don't like something, you'd say, okay, you get a point deduction because you got a angry comment or a snarky comment.
I can think of that in a future version of Viva, where you see a smart widget saying you gave out way more angry reactions than positive ones. Behavior.
How are you feeling?
Yeah.
So in general, I really liked playing around with the CLI. It's not necessarily a thing that's only prohibited for CLI. You can use the graph to get this data as well, because this is all coming from the graph. I really like the fact that with the CLI, you could just paste together a few lines of code and then send it as an adaptive card, instead of mucking up, I don't know, C#, Blazor. And I can imagine that with Blazor, you can do cool stuff as well, but you have to write all the plumbing yourself.
Yeah, you would need to, or actually I looked at the graph calls that are, or the commands are based on graph calls, of course. And of course I can do the same calls, but I would need to create the whole interface. But it's if you the CLI is so cool because you are so quick and can start with it. And if you want to create something more like a report, you can do it with the Docker example. I think, I don't know the episode number, but 5 or 6 episodes ago, you showed us how you can spin up a container based on the Power Automate, or you can go to a different approach and maybe store every entry, let's say every Friday, and create your own database, and then create a visual representation of that in a Teams application. But I would always start out with that too.
I can imagine that rather than doing this and then looping through each user and scoring points, you could put it in, I don't know, Dataverse and work from there and do trend analysis on Dataverse. That makes sense as well.
Just on a personal note, do you always write your code so you write in Visual Studio Code, but you copy paste it to the command line?
No, I usually press F5 because the thing is I put it in a gist. I didn't put it in a repository, and in a gist you can't press F5. Then it will say, "Oh, I can't find the file."
But did you? Of course, you are in the position to do that. But did you need to change something inside of a command, or was this just a sample? So no PR for messing around with, okay, I have this in my head, I need to tweak the existing command a little bit to make the sample work. It was just, okay, everything just...
For these 2 samples, there are actually 3 PRs. There's one PR in addition to the existing docs that explains how to do queries like this, because this wasn't in our documents on how to work with more complex scenarios. So we decided, okay, this makes sense. It makes sense to put it in documentation. And I did a PR with this code. So this is a sample. This is what you can achieve. And I did a PR for this code saying this is a sample. This is something you can achieve. They aren't approved yet, I think, but there was no need to change anything in the CLI itself.
Okay.
I did recall that we had a minor bug when I think you pointed it out. I'm not sure. I think we had a bug getting the replies, but that was already solved, I guess. I think there was that actually might explain why I had problems signing in. The first message was the administrator changed your token. I think the graph has changed that you now need the new application permissions to retrieve replies, and I think we changed our Active Directory.
Okay. Yeah, makes sense.
Sure.
So they made it a little bit more secure, so that it's a little harder to get the replies because it's sensitive data, of course.
I can do is closed and then filter on. Yeah, here. Teams message reply authorization issue. So we had the authorization issue that we were missing a scope to do channel message read all. So that was the only thing we needed to update in the application, and that's because it's changed recently.
Yeah, the scope changed on the graph endpoint. Yeah. Or statement endpoint. Yeah.
Cats are fighting again. So that's it. Other questions?
Cool. Other questions?
Then it's going to be it for.
I still have to do your recreate your logic app with the container.
That's still on the list.
Because I need it. So
that's still on the list.
Yeah, I will take I already looked at the graph calls you did with the commands to get the data also in Blazor, and to get also two applications like a dashboard for a team to retrieve the most active user, and then also an app that goes through the whole tenant. But of course, you need to be careful with who should be able to see that, and the authentication and authorization and security aspect of that.
That's running with this as well. So you can only run this if you're the team administrator for that specific team. Otherwise, you're not allowed to retrieve all that information.
Yeah, but for teams, I can create an Azure AD app, and if I put it in the server side client secret, I could hand out that application to basically everyone, and you need to be careful with that. And I think I'm not sure if it's still the best practice, but if you remember it, there was the example with the notification bot, and they had two different Teams applications. The one that retrieves the information and one to create them, to really separate the experiences and to make sure that you don't, you're not rely on authentication and authorization within the application, but you really make it two different things.
For the admin,
yeah. That makes sense.
Yeah, the only thing I'm worried about is if you're gonna create a UI for this and you're gonna do it on the fly, for some big teams, you're gonna have a UI that's running a long time.
You would need to store the data somewhere. Or depends on how big is the team. And then you again at the challenge where to save the data.
Yeah.
But it starts with Teams applications quite early, because you don't have a property bag or something to store even minor things.
Yeah, there's nothing in there.
You could use the group property bag or the mail property bag to store the most active user of the last week. You can store one entry, but that's it.
Yeah, and it's not that fast though.
Yeah.
Then I would go for something Azure storage faster.
Cool.
Don't have to worry about that one.
Yeah, it's not a big problem, but if you create a sample and then you need to provide infrastructure for storage and this and that, the sample gets
that gets
pretty
big.
intense quickly.
Yeah. Cool.
Okay, then.
That was it for this evening, and see you guys next time.
Thanks. See you.
Thanks, Appie.
Bye.
Cool. Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening. Make sure to check out the show notes at selectedtech.show to get all the mentioned references. And one more thing. Please tweet about the podcast and give them a 5-star review. This really helps the guys a lot. Thank you, and see you next time. Bye.